part of the work that we provide here and the news, the updates, what's happening on the ground, the true image of what's happening in Gaza, the reality of Israel, the reality of their conduct, the reality of the governments that support Israel is mainly due to, well, the mass propaganda coming from mainstream media, the propaganda in the mainstream media to a level where many people have boycotted now mainstream media. More revelations are coming about some figures in mainstream media. One of them is Rafi Berg. Rafi Berg, the BBC Middle East editor, is now exposed as a CIA and Mossad collaborator, according to a report and an investigation. Now, the thing here with the BBC in particular, it's public funded. It's supposed to be owned by the public, at the end of the British public who pay for it yearly, although many people, approximately 500,000, they canceled their licenses when it comes to the BBC. And that's something that the BBC did not have an answer for. And now these people are exposed as actual agents serving Israel directly. And part of the investigation that was published on multiple websites online spoke about the fear environment when it comes to reporting on Palestine, scaring people off, twisting narratives to be more suitable and in favor of Israel, direct manipulation, and of course the headlines like people dying in Gaza. It's like, who killed them? 50 people dead. What happened? Israel says terrorists found in a hospital. Titles like that and headlines similar to this, especially when compared to other conflicts around the world, they've shown the true colors of news networks like the BBC, now with confirmed agents working within their organization, and other mainstream media outlets as well. Now, this is something that many people are already aware of, but the fact that there's more and more evidence coming about certain figures from these networks being actual agents and collaborators, and by the way, it takes a lot to prove these things, so the connection would have been very clear with these people and their communication with either the Mossad or the CIA or any other intel, says a lot about the level of coordination coming with them and how hard mainstream media works to twist the narrative and push for the propaganda and lies when it comes to Palestine, even 15 months after this genocide began. Some of them are still questioning the word genocide. Some of them refrain from using the word genocide. They still use terminology that is in favor of Israel. They do not criticize Israel or Israeli leaders to the same level that they criticize the Palestinian side. They delegitimize the Palestinian armed resistance against Israel, but they do not delegitimize the Israeli genocide army conducting a full-scale genocide, mass-scale terror, and with a head of state in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, wanted for war crimes for the ICC, and they also have a case of genocide in the ICJ. These things are very important, and they are also a reminder not to trust mainstream media, even if they come up with certain information that might be right, because some of them, what they will try and do is push for a few, news briefings here and there that might be more accurate to attract more audience, because they're losing audience, to build some of that lost trust, only to feed you the poison at a later stage. The following thing that I want to talk to you about is Iran. Iran is preparing. We've been talking about their military drills, and now they're saying that they have these new air defense system that intercepts bunker busters. They're revealing. And not only that, they're saying that they have cities of drones and missiles that they will be unveiling at one point as well. Iran, that has a pending response to Israel in the form of True Promise 3, well, it's clearly preparing for something to come. Before they had this Israeli attack against them, they had 2 operations against Israel. And many observers were criticizing Iran for the delay and the fact that this delay led Israel to conduct even more terror against Iran and against the Palestinians and the Lebanese too. However, from an Iranian perspective, they clearly want to be protected as a state as well. And the fact that they were successful in intercepting a lot of the projectiles that came following the Israeli attack on them in October indicates that there's something happening there. Don't forget, there's also a pending agreement that they were due to publish with the Russians too. More talks about coordination, including with defense and military with China. All of these things are very important, especially if Iran would want to conduct an operation against Israel that would be at a larger scale than before, which could potentially lead to an open exchange back and forth, not just a restricted blow, waiting for another response from Israel. Despite the geographical distance, despite the fact that, well, it's not very easy for both countries to engage in an open war altogether day by day, but Iran is indeed preparing. Now, the other argument about Iran's delay in response is the fact that they're giving time, or the notion that they've been giving time to a ceasefire. And they've had a ceasefire in Lebanon, albeit fragile. Now there are talks about a ceasefire in Gaza. The Iranians might be waiting to see if that succeeds. If we have a ceasefire in Gaza, the Iranians would say, well, look, our lack of response led to that. Again, that's their argument. Whether their argument is correct or incorrect, that's a separate story. But that's the notion that's coming from Iran. Because back in July, the Iranians were saying, just before the second response, the Iranian president said, we've given them time. The Americans told us, don't attack Israel yet. The ceasefire is just around the corner. However, we've had months and then we had to respond. Are they going to be facing the same situation now? And is it a case of Iran believing the American administration or the Israelis, or is it purely for their own interest, because they, as a state, are not really interested in war at the end of the day? None of the countries in the region are interested in war, but these wars are imposed on them by Israel and the powers that support Israel, the neo-colonialist state and its backers. They've constantly been pushing for wars and mass terror and aggression in the region. And the countries in the region, well, they would find their way to tackle this aggression. And Iran, with its position, it's not a popular position that they're taking, or not a popular or common position that they're taking in comparison to other states. Other states are very inactive when it comes to the genocide. Iran was the only country in its entirety, as in government level, official state, public support in the army, fighting or attacking Israel twice in the past year. The other resistance fronts, if we talk about Yemen, for example, or Lebanon, parts of the state are targeting them. In Yemen, there are two governments, but the majority of the power is in the hands of Ansarullah. They are still attacking Israel. Hezbollah, you're talking about a movement within a country, and likewise with the Iraqi resistance that now actually decreased their levels of attacks, if not completely stopped them, against Israel. So Iran is sitting there on its own with that position, and that's not something very easy. And Iran has proven that they still can do it, although other countries around them are not really supporting them, but in some cases working against the Iranians. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is a panel. There's a committee for the Israeli government that is calling now for Israel to prepare for a war with Turkey. There was a report on multiple Israeli media outlets about the Nagel Commission. Turkish reinforcement in Syria may pose a direct threat to Israel. The report emphasizes that Turkish reinforcement in Syria, as part of its efforts to restore the Ottoman crown, according to them, may create new threats for Israel. The recommendation prepare for a direct war with Turkey. This is something that we've been talking about ever since the dramatic changes inside of Syria and the growing Turkish influence inside of Syria, because Turkey has been one of the main backer, really, of the Syrian armed opposition. And despite multiple attempts to try and reach a political solution with the now fled President Bashar al-Assad, it hasn't succeeded. Now, with this presence and with attempts from the Syrian new interim government to establish a full state, a Ministry of Defense, a full functioning country, have alliances, have potential defense pacts and strategic agreements with multiple countries, that's something that's worrying for Israel. Because from an Israeli perspective, they would rather deal with movements. They don't like to deal with states with an official state level. They want countries to be torn. They want to deal with certain movements that are delegitimized internationally. Israel, what they do is they lobby countries to take movements out the law, or make them a terrorist organization, prescribe them as a terrorist organization, therefore disabling them to a very large extent, and also stripping them of legitimacy. There's a problem when you deal with a state, because you can't just delegitimize a state as a whole. It's a bit more difficult. And also, especially if that state is backed by another large country with connections globally. From an Israeli perspective, they are still delegitimizing the new Syrian government. One of the key figures in the Israeli foreign ministry in the past couple of days, he was warning global leaders that no, these people in Syria, they haven't changed their skin, actually. And the foreign minister himself, Gideon Saar, said they are a terrorist gang from Idlib who are taking over. We don't trust them. They're terrorist jihadis, they call them, and they are looking to have an Islamic state next to us, and the Turks are backing them. So from the Israeli perspective, they still cast doubt. They still strip the new interim government of legitimacy in attempt to fight the Turkish attempt to restore or instill or have a state inside of Syria that is stable, that has a good economy, that is going to be rebuilt, that has more refugees coming back, 9 million refugees across the world to come back, rebuild their country, and also be a strong, independent and sovereign state without any other foreign country imposing their will on the Syrian people from abroad. Now, the Israeli attempts now inside of Syria are based on certain minorities inside of Syria that will potentially have their own self-governing zones. They're hoping that the United States will increase the support for SDF in the northeast. That's the biggest bet for the United States and Israel inside of Syria. But that's where the fiercest current campaign is ongoing by the Syrian National Army, by armed opposition groups or interim government groups backed by Turkey. Turkey is conducting attacks in the northeastern part of Syria. And despite the fact that there have been talks and negotiations between the SDF and the interim government and Turkey, things are still escalating. The SDF, from their perspective, they changed the flags. They said we're willing to negotiate. However, they're still backed by the United States. And the United States, they don't have an interest in having an independent and sovereign Syria that works for its people. They have an interest in having multiple states that constantly fight each other, divide and rule, and for Israel to be the queen of the region when it comes to technology, when it comes to power, when it comes to economy, and when it comes to energy. The United States wants Israel to be the main energy hub, the main economy hub, the main superpower in the region. And the Israelis know that the Turks are some of their biggest opponents in that field, on all these fields: economy, military, oil, and other fields as well. And now the talks that are coming from Israel is that we could be facing a front here that is far worse than the Iran front that was there before. In the video that I posted yesterday, I spoke about the Israeli-made General Itzhak Brik saying that we could be facing tens of times more evil from this front on our Syrian borders than what we had with Iran, because now we could be talking about state-level actors rather than certain movements or just some influence here and there. Now, what will happen if Israel prepares, for example, for war with Turkey, and is that likely to happen anytime soon? Well, there are different arguments when it comes to that. First and foremost, when it comes to Syria, the new interim government, they need to have full territorial integrity. In the northeast, Israel is occupying parts of the south. Don't forget the occupied Golan. They've been occupying the Golan Heights for 57 years now. That needs to be dealt with too. And then talk about uniting the country, rebuilding the country, and having a stable force. The Israeli actions are coming to try and take it one step ahead, be one step ahead from the Turks and from the Syrians themselves. They're hoping that there would be a delay when it comes to the Northeast. However, the comments coming from Trump, unlike his comments with Gaza, have been somewhat reluctant in sending more U.S. troops. Trump previously withdrew certain troops from Syria, and he is not very interested in having an escalation, especially with a NATO member in the form of Turkey. Now, on the ground, they're both fighting. The US and Turkey are fighting inside of Syria. They're both supporting opposite sides, and they have different interests. They're having diplomatic talks, they're having negotiations, but there's a clear big difference. Like there are differences within many countries that are members of either the NATO or any other organization too. So it's unlikely that the United States will decide to all of a sudden send reinforcements that will become a full-fledged war or will lead to a full-fledged war between them and the Turks, because now Turkey is not using all of its force in northeast Syria, and the US, they're indicating that, slowly we want to start withdrawing from this area. And Trump, when he was speaking about the Syrian situation, he even complimented Erdogan himself. He said it was an unfriendly takeover, but this man is very smart. He knows what he wants, and. So unless there's something very significant that's going to change with the Trump administration when it comes to Syria, that could turn in the favor of Israel, the Syrians are on the path of liberating their country completely, taking full control, having everything belonging to the interim government. And that, at that time, will start posing an even bigger threat to Israel, and that could attract a potential clash between them and the Turks. That is, unless Israel decides to escalate even further from now inside of Syria, and will make it inevitable for Turkey to make certain moves inside of Syria that will lead to a larger clash, maybe to a level of a war between them and Israel.